The file structure on the recovered drive was corrupted, a digital chaotic mess that took forensic data specialists months to untangle. But when they finally reassembled the timeline, the silence that followed the final entry was deafening. We begin with the context. Site 14 was never officially on any map produced after 1982. It was a listening post, ostensibly designed to intercept high-altitude weather data, but the locals in the nearest settlement, a dying coal town 40 miles south, whispered of different purposes. They spoke of the hum, a low-frequency vibration that rattled teeth and caused livestock to birth distinct abominations. In November 2004, lead investigator Elias Thorne, audio specialist Sarah Jenkins, cameraman Marcus Vane, and structural engineer Dr. Eris Kogan arrived at the perimeter fence. The footage from Marcus's shoulder-mounted camera begins in grain and static. The wind is the first thing you notice, a howling physical force tearing through the skeletal remains of the taiga forest. The team stands before the massive concrete maw of the facility entrance, partially buried in snowdrifts that look like frozen waves. Elias's voice cuts through the wind, confident, perhaps arrogant. He speaks into his lapel mic, logging the date and time, unaware that he is dictating the preamble to his own obituary. The sense of isolation is absolute. The gray sky merges with the white ground, creating a void where direction loses meaning. They are mere specks against the brutalist architecture of the Soviet giant, preparing to step into a tomb that has been holding its breath for 20 years.
Breaking the seal of the airlock wasn't just a physical act, it was a transition between worlds. Dr. Eris spent nearly an hour cutting through the rusted locking mechanism with an industrial torch. The sparks flew like angry hornets in the gloom, illuminating the tense faces of the crew. When the heavy steel wheel finally turned, it let out a shriek of metal on metal that sounded disturbingly like a human scream, echoing into the valley behind them. As the door swung inward, the pressure differential caused a rush of air that nearly knocked Sarah off her feet. The smell hit them instantly. It wasn't the smell of rot or decay, which one might expect from an abandoned site. It was the smell of ozone, copper, and something sterile, like a hospital ward sterilized with bleach and electricity. The air inside was stagnant, preserved in a time capsule of the Cold War. As they crossed the threshold, their flashlights cut beams through the dust motes that had been suspended in silence for decades. The interior walls were painted a nauseating shade of institutional green, peeling away to reveal damp gray concrete underneath. Cables hung from the ceiling like disemboweled intestines. Elias ordered a comms check. This was the first anomaly noted in the logs. Despite being only 10 feet apart, the radio signals were riddled with static interference, a rhythmic pulsing noise that matched the beat of a human heart. They didn't know it yet, but the facility was already reacting to their presence.
They established a base camp in what used to be the security checkpoint. The atmosphere was heavy, pressing down on their chests. Sarah, the audio specialist, was the first to notice the unease. She kept adjusting her headphones, grimacing as if in pain. She claimed that even with the equipment turned off, she could hear a low thrumming noise right at the edge of perception. "It's not in the ears, she whispered to Marcus, whose camera caught the genuine fear in her eyes. "It's behind the eyes." They unpacked their gear, spectral analyzers, Geiger counters, and thermal imaging cameras. The Geiger counters remained silent, which was a relief, but the thermal cameras picked up strange hotspots in the walls, veins of heat that seemed to pulse and move, as if the concrete itself had a circulatory system. Elias dismissed it as old wiring or residual geothermal activity, pushing the team to move deeper. They navigated the labyrinthine corridors of Level 1, passing empty offices where papers were still stacked on desks, coffee mugs covered in 20 years of dust sitting exactly where they were left. It was a Marie Celeste scenario on an industrial scale. There were no signs of struggle, no bodies, just an interruption of daily life that felt sudden and absolute. As they reached the elevator shaft, they found the doors pried open. The shaft went down into an abyss that swallowed their flashlight beams whole. From the darkness below, a draft of warm, moist air drifted up, carrying that metallic scent, stronger now, mixed with something else, something organic.
The elevators were dead, so they took the stairs. Spiraling down into the earth, the temperature began to rise. It was subtle at first, but by the time they reached Level 3, they were shedding their heavy winter parkas. The architecture changed here. The sharp, utilitarian lines of the upper levels gave way to curved hallways and acoustic dampening foam that covered every inch of the walls and ceiling. It was a soundless void. Their footsteps were swallowed instantly. Sarah's equipment began to scream. The needle on her decibel meter was fluctuating wildly, yet the room was silent to the naked ear. "Infrasound," she told Elias, her voice trembling. "It's hitting 18.9 hertz, the fear frequency. This frequency is known to cause hallucinations, nausea, and anxiety in humans because it resonates with the natural frequency of the eyeball. This explained the shadows they were starting to see in their peripheral vision, figures that darted away when looked at directly." Marcus zoomed his camera down the long foam-padded corridor. On the digital display, but not with his own eyes, he saw a figure standing at the far end. It was tall, motionless, and wearing the same hazard gear as them. But there were only 4 of them, and all were accounted for. When he lowered the camera to look with his own eyes, the hallway was empty. When he raised the camera again, the figure was closer.
Paranoia set in rapidly on Level 3. Dr. Eris, usually the stoic pragmatist, became obsessed with the structural integrity of the walls. He kept muttering that the dimensions were wrong, that the blueprint on his tablet didn't match the physical space. "This room is 5 meters longer than it should be," he argued, pacing the length of a server room. "Space is stretching." Elias tried to maintain command, but his authority was eroding against the rising tide of irrationality. The hum was louder now, a physical vibration that rattled the bones in their ears. They found a break room on this level. On the table was a tape recorder, an old reel-to-reel from the 80s. Elias pressed play. The voice that emerged was calm, speaking in Russian. Sarah translated in real time. "Day 44. The sound has stopped. We thought silence would be better. We were wrong. The silence is where it lives. Do not listen to the spaces between the words." The tape ended with a sound that can only be described as wet tearing. The team stared at each other. The air in the room felt thick, like gelatin. Suddenly, Marcus's nose began to bleed profusely. Thick, dark blood dripped onto the camera lens. Then Sarah's nose started, then Elias's. They wiped the blood away, but the flow was constant,
a synchronization of biological failure triggered by the invisible pressure waves hammering their bodies.
They decided to retreat. The mission was scrubbed. Elias made the call to return to the surface, but the stairwell door they had entered through was fused shut. Not locked, fused. The metal of the door had melted into the frame, cooling into a single solid piece of steel. There was no heat source, no welding marks. It was as if the atoms had simply decided to merge. Panic, raw and animalistic, took hold. They were trapped. Their only option was to go deeper, to find a maintenance elevator or a ventilation shaft on the lower levels. As they moved towards the secondary stairwell, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into total darkness. The darkness at Site 14 wasn't empty. It was heavy. They switched to night vision. The green-hued world of the camera revealed what their eyes missed. The walls were covered in handprints. Thousands of them. Some were small, childlike. Others were elongated, fingers stretching far too long to be human. The prints were made in a substance that glowed faintly under UV light. Sarah screamed. In her headphones, she heard a voice. It wasn't static anymore. It was clear. It was her own voice, speaking to her, narrating her actions a split second before she took them. Sarah turns around. Sarah drops her flashlight. And in her terror, she turned around. And she dropped her flashlight. The loop had begun.
The separation was inevitable. In the chaos of the dark, navigating the maze of Level 4, Marcus fell behind. He stopped to film a peculiar anomaly, a perfect sphere of water floating in midair, suspended by the acoustic pressure. It was beautiful and terrifying. He focused the lens on it, entranced. When he lowered the camera, the rest of the team was gone. He called out to them, "Elias, Sarah." His voice didn't echo. The sound fell dead from his lips, absorbed instantly by the environment. He began to run, his breathing ragged, the camera shaking violently. He turned a corner and froze. Standing in the middle of the hallway was Dr. Eris. But Eris was facing the wall, his forehead pressed against the concrete, whispering rapidly. Marcus approached him slowly, reaching out a hand. "Eris, we have to move." Eris didn't turn, he just kept whispering. Marcus moved closer, the camera mic picking up the audio. Eris wasn't speaking Russian or English. He was mimicking the sound of the machinery, a perfect mechanical whirring and clicking coming from a human throat. Marcus grabbed his shoulder and spun him around. Eris's face was smooth, no eyes, no nose, just a mouth stretched impossibly wide, emitting the mechanical noise. Marcus dropped the camera. The footage spins wildly before landing face up. The last thing seen is Marcus being dragged backward into the dark, his boots scraping the floor, while the faceless Eris stands perfectly still, watching.
Elias and Sarah were now alone. They realized Marcus and Eris were gone, but they couldn't stop. To stop was to die. They reached Level 5, the containment sector. The environment here was radically different. The industrial concrete gave way to biological growth.
A black, mold-like substance covered the floor and walls, pulsing with a bioluminescent rhythm. It was warm here, hot even, 40 degrees Celsius. Sweat poured down their faces. Sarah's audio equipment was picking up a cacophony now, voices. Not just one or two, but hundreds, a choir of agony. She recognized the voices. She heard her mother, who had died 10 years ago. She heard Elias screaming in pain, even though Elias was standing right next to her, silent and pale. "It's a library," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face mixed with blood from her nose. "It keeps the sounds. It keeps the voices of everyone who has ever been here." Elias tried to drag her forward, but she resisted. She was listening to something specific. "Marcus is calling me," she said. Elias shook his head. "Marcus is gone, Sarah." "No, listen." She unplugged the headphones and held them up. Faintly, tinny and distorted, came Marcus's voice. "Don't go into the reactor room, please. It's hungry." The voice looped, repeating the exact same cadence and inflection every 4 seconds. It wasn't Marcus. It was a recording being played back by the entity.
Elias left Sarah. He had to. She refused to move, entranced by the choir of the dead in her headset. She sat down in the black mold, closing her eyes, letting the darkness take her. Elias, armed with a flare gun and a single camera, pushed into the reactor room. This was the heart of Site 14. The blueprints showed a standard nuclear pile, but reality showed something else. The room was vast, a cavernous sphere hollowed out of the mountain. Suspended in the center, held in place by massive electromagnets and acoustic emitters, was not a reactor core. It was a tear, a rift in the fabric of space, jagged and vibrating. It looked like a shard of obsidian that absorbed all light. The hum was emanating from this rift. It was the throat of the world screaming. Elias approached the control console. It was covered in the same organic matter. He found a logbook, the final entry scrawled in blood. "We opened the door to listen to the stars, but something else heard us." Elias raised his camera to film the rift. As the lens focused on the black void, the void looked back. The camera feed distorted, pixels bleeding into red and black. A shape began to emerge from the rift. Not a physical shape, but a waveform made visible. It was a frequency that had gained sentience.
The psychological breakage of Elias Thorne is documented in the final 10 minutes of the footage. He stops trying to escape. He sits in the chair of the control room, facing the rift. He begins to talk to it. He confesses his sins. He talks about his childhood, his failures, his fears, and the rift answers. Not in words, but in memories. The monitors around him flicker to life, showing grainy black and white footage of his own life. He sees himself as a child. He sees his first marriage. He sees the moment he decided to come to Site 14. The entity is digesting his history. Elias begins to laugh, a dry, broken sound. "It doesn't want our bodies," he says to the camera, his eyes wide and unblinking. "It eats time. It eats the noise we make." He stands up and walks toward the railing overlooking the abyss. The hum is now so loud, the microphone on the camera is clipping constantly, reducing the audio to a harsh, rhythmic buzz. Elias climbs over the railing. He turns to the camera one last time. His mouth moves, but no sound comes out. The frequency has taken his voice. He leans back and falls into the track. The camera remains on the console, recording the empty chair and the pulsing rift.
The camera continues to record for another hour. Nothing moves in the frame, but the audio landscape changes. The harsh buzzing subsides, replaced by a wet, squelching sound. Something pulls itself up over the railing where Elias fell. It is not Elias. It is a mass of flesh and fabric, fused together in a chaotic sculpture of suffering. It wears pieces of the team's gear, a boot here, a patch of a parka there. It has no face, only a speaker cone embedded where the head should be. The creature shambles toward the console. It reaches out a limb that ends in frayed wires and bone. It touches the camera. The image goes upside down as the camera is knocked to the floor. Now the view is a close-up of the metal grating of the floor and the creature's feet. The speaker head emits a sound. It is a perfect reproduction of Elias's voice from the beginning of the expedition. November 2004, Site 14. We are entering the facility. Then it switches to Sarah's voice. It's behind the eyes. Then Marcus, help me. The creature is a collage of their demise. It is practicing.
The battery of the camera is dying. The red light blinks in the corner of the frame. The creature leaves the room, dragging its mass back toward the upper levels. The camera lies on the floor, pointing toward the rift in the distance. The rift begins to close, or perhaps it is just receding, satisfied with its meal. The silence returns to Site 14. But it is not a true silence. If you listen closely to the noise floor of the recording, and audio engineers have amplified this section thousands of times, you can hear them, all of them. Elias, Sarah, Marcus, Harris, they are screaming. They are trapped within the frequency, suspended in a state of eternal dying, their consciousness converted into sound waves that will bounce off these concrete walls forever. The screen fades to black as the battery finally dies. The video ends. The text on the screen reads, "No recovery mission was attempted. The entrance to Site 14 was collapsed with explosives on the orders of the Ministry of Interior in 2007. The area remains a radio dead zone. Do not attempt to locate the signal."